we'll go ahead and get our afternoon session going. I hope you all were able to grab some lunch and see the exhibition. So hopefully you have a lot of questions for our exhibiting artists. So I am going to go through everyone's bios, and then I'll turn it over to Tamara Cedré to moderate our discussion this afternoon. So this afternoon, as I mentioned, we have 5 of the 7 SWANS artists who are joining us today. We have Nancy Buchanan, who is a Los Angeles-based artist working across performance, video, drawing, and installation. A central figure in the feminist art movement in Los Angeles since the 1970s, her work is collected by institutions including the Museum of Modern Art and the Getty Research Institute. She was on the faculty at Cal Arts for over 2 decades and had her first comprehensive retrospective at the Brick in Los Angeles last year. We have Sheila Pinkel, who is an artist and activist and pioneering figure in experimental photography. In the 1970s, she began studying with a physicist and developed a practice of cameraless photography, using light as a material for art making. She taught at Pitzer College here in Claremont for 25 years, and her work is held by collections including the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, LACMA, and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Judith Dancoff is a filmmaker and writer whose fiction and essays have appeared in numerous journals, including the Georgia Review, Alaska Quarterly Review, and Creative Nonfiction, among many others. She holds an MFA in writing from Warren Wilson College, an MA in education from Columbia University, and an MFA in filmmaking from UCLA. We also have Hillary Mushkin, who is an artist and professor of art and design at California Institute of Technology. She is founder of Incendiary Traces, an art and research initiative that reverse engineers the politics of landscape visualization. Her work has been exhibited at the Autry Museum of American West, the Armory Center of the Arts, Caltech, and Art Center of College of Design. And then, of course, joining our panel is Elin Slavick, who we heard from earlier this morning. And moderating today's conversation is Tamara Cedré, an artist and visiting professor of photography here at Pitzer. A first-generation stateside Puerto Rican, her work uses documentary forms and archival materials to address issues at the nexus of land, labor, migration, and identity. She is a recipient of grants from the Joan Mitchell Foundation and the California Arts Council. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. Thank you. It's going to just loop. Yeah.
So just so people know, that's Sheila, Nancy, Hillary, Judith, and me, Elin. Thank you for that. Because I know you by
I'm the youngest of 6.
I know you by your work. I'm used to that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm so excited to be here. It's just rare that you get to see an exhibit that tackles such a complex issue like the nuclear state, and from such a range of perspectives. It's one of my favorite exhibits we've had here. So congratulations on that. And I just, to start off the questions, I think we all were kind of wondering, how did you guys come together as a collective, as a group, to work together as the SWANS, conceived in 2022? And how does working in a group, how does that differ from your individual practices? Like,
Nancy should answer the question. And you guys can grab it in the middle.
Well, to answer the last question first, we don't really work together. We do our own individual practices, and it's sort of up to each of us to decide, what we'd like to contribute if we have an opportunity to exhibit together. But In 2022, my old friend Susanne Slavick told me that her sister Ellen was coming out to California, and she had a show. No, she didn't have a show at Caltech. She had a residency at Caltech with Hillary, and I met her, and she was going to work with this undeveloped photo material, and we talked about coming from families that had addressed issues of nuclear weapons, and so I kind of thought, well, Ellen should meet some other artists I know who are working on similar things, and so we all got together for a dinner, and we didn't have any plan to show together, but that was sort of the beginning.
And it was actually us. It was the 5 of us. And then we had a lunch at Sheila's where we invited Lucy. And then we just invited Fiona Amundsen, who's in New Zealand.
But there is something powerful about the fact that you guys all are showing in this group, like this, you know.
Microphone, can't hear you.
I'm sorry. But there is something really powerful about the fact that you guys are all kind of working together to exhibit in this way, that, you know, you're this collective voice. So for many of you, you come to the topic through personal history, family connections to the nuclear era, particularly the Manhattan Project that we talked about before, or to contaminated sites. Can you talk about how the personal thread first entered into your work? And I know several of you. That would be fantastic.
Well, for me, my father died from radiation-induced cancer from working on the Manhattan Project when I was not quite 4 years old. So I could say that's where it entered into my work when I was very young. The process of growing up without a parent. And then as I became first a filmmaker and then a writer, that became my first subject, which has really followed me, is still kind of my ongoing subject, although I have then spread out and written about other things. But I also was, and I'm sure you have it in your family as well, the person in the family that is the historian that meets other people and searches for information. And but in terms of entering into my work, but maybe other people's as well, I feel this kind of imperative to witness what I know about my life and how it relates to the lives of others and the world we live in, this impulse to witness, I would say. Anyone else?
No, I just wanted Judith to talk about the milk bottles in the show and that piece.
Well, perhaps other people have seen that piece. When I was, I did the video on that, but when I was 2 years old, after working on the Manhattan Project, our father took us to Oak Ridge, where they had the uranium plant, and my mother says my ear infections were so bad that summer my eardrums nearly burst, and I have scar tissue on my eardrums, and then in my growing up, I was sort of okay, but in my 20s, I began to suffer symptoms of severe hypothyroidism, and this was the case not just for me, but for many people growing up around the Hanford plant that you heard about, and also around Oak Ridge. And so the milk bottles are there because one way they kind of hypothesize that children were particularly exposed was that the radiation, the iodine-131, which is what causes thyroid problems, went into the pasture lands. The cows ate the grass, the children drank the milk. So it was called the milk pathway. And you can look it up online, the milk pathway. But listening to David's talk, just about the way that these traces of radiation have existed since the first discovery of X-rays. They're everywhere and around us. And I also think in many families it's not sort of completely known, but the breast cancer rates and rates of different diseases and so forth, that these traces of this wound, the scarring, continue to follow us everywhere.
About the personal, I just want to make sure, I want to make sure to say that the personal is political and the political is personal, and it always is. And so anything you make is going to be a reflection or a criticism or a subversion of the dominant paradigm, or I would hope it would be. But I think, for me, I made work about my very much about the body and feminism in graduate school. And when I look back at my work now that I'm 60, I think I started with the individual body, worked through the familial body, then worked through the sort of the national political body, and now it's like global or international, and so I think it happens organically. But I do think even though this show, and I think all of us make work about such profound, potentially nihilistic, Armageddon things, that we do all have such a strong personal relationship to it or history with it. And I think, in fact, probably all of us do, but we don't all deal with it.
So some it came through the family, and others it was from that movement that was anti-nuclear proliferation that you started in your work of activism. Sheila, did you want to?
Sure. So several of us have families that were some way involved in the nuclear industry, and I'm one of those people. I became an anti-nuke in 1980, and between 1980 and 1992, I made 13 thermonuclear gardens that were information artworks about the growth of the military industrial complex in the nuclear industry, because it was almost impossible to find out anything about it at that time, and it still is, actually. But what I hadn't realized is that my father was a principal in the nuclear industry. And I never knew what he did for a living until the mid-1980s, because it had been top secret, and nobody ever explained what he did for a living to the children in our family. And so at one point, I went to my parents' house for dinner and I was looking for advertisements of the nuclear industry so that I could deconstruct them, because they were all pro-nuclear and I wanted to counter that. But I couldn't find any advertisements in normal libraries, magazines. And I went to my folks' house for dinner, and there on the table was nuclear news. I'm going, whoa. And it turned out that was the magazine, that was the in-house magazine for the U.S. nuclear industry, and nobody else could get a copy of it. And that had all the ads. I was in heaven, because now I could do my deconstruction of the nuclear industry. But it took all that time. And my father actually was very generous to me. He agreed with my critique of the nuclear industry. He said in the beginning it was the scientists who were working on developing this resource, but then very quickly the attorneys and the corporations took control of the development of that resource, wrested it away from the scientists. They didn't want to develop it as a real resource until they knew how to reclaim the fissionable material from fuel rods. But the other people say, well, if we can make nuclear reactors, Westinghouse and GE said, then eventually we'll be able to figure out how to reclaim those fuel rods. Well, they never were able to figure out how to reclaim the fuel rods. And so they every single nuclear reactor in the United States has a holding container for outdated fuel rods that they can't use for energy production anymore. But my father really wasn't part of the military nuclear exploration. He got into it after World War II, had gone to Oak Ridge, and fell in love with this water container that was full of blue glowing nuclear fuel rods. And so he designed and built the first nuclear reactor at NACA, which became NASA in the early 1950s. And that was to see if they could use solid-state nuclear propellants for airplanes. And they decided they couldn't, because if the airplane crashed, then there would be nuclear all over the place.
Right.
Right. So they stopped that trajectory. So I'll stop there.
Well, my family never threw anything away. And so my father died when I was 13, my mother died when I was 18, and then suddenly I had all these boxes of family papers. And my father used to bring his work home. He was a physicist, he worked at Lockheed, and he had been an advisor to the government about defense. He used to bring his work home. And sometimes in his study, I would see him with papers that had these big red stamps, top secret, do not remove. And of course, he brought them home. And so they were in these boxes. And so my piece is kind of a boiling down of some of that material with a lot of questions, like what is security? And how do we feel now about communism? And you decide. I mean, there's each folder has material corresponding to one of the letters of the word security, which is above the hanging file folders.
Okay, I don't have a family member who's related to this topic, but as you said in the introduction, I am on the faculty at Caltech. I'm a research professor there. I'm not a scientist. I have no science background, but I collaborate with scientists a lot. And in fact, in the show, there is an artifact, a video, or animation, I guess, that's an artifact from a collaboration with some scientists who are doing climate modeling, just to give you one example, who are at Caltech. But the reason that I guess I ended up working with all these wonderful people is because, in part, like Nancy said, when Ellen was just moved to California, she was doing an artist in residence at Caltech, which is the program that I initiated, actually. So that was that. But in addition to that, what Nancy and Judith did not mention is that both of their fathers had some connections to Caltech, right? And so they really wanted me to be part of this, to kind of be a representative, I guess, of that. And in fact, we had talked about doing some drawing on the campus of Caltech together, which would have been something that would have had some formal kind of relationship to my project Incendiary Traces, which involves drawing with groups of people in politicized landscapes. But scheduling-wise, we didn't end up doing that, and instead I ended up drawing myself. And some of the drawings that are in the not the Nichols, but the other gallery, I can't think of the name of, no, the other one, the Lensner, are of a building at Caltech called the Kellogg Radiation Lab, which, or I should say one of the drawings, I have others that are not in the show, that is a building on campus where Oppenheimer was taught for a term, and it's still there, and people were coming and going who were, involved in physics and other things that were, it's so that there is plenty of on the campus itself. There's plenty of architectural trace of the, Caltech's involvement with all kinds of military activity. So not just the nuclear. Yeah.
Wow. That's deep. I need to sit with that. So for several of you, Fiona, Sheila, Ellen, experimental photography is a through line in the exhibition. And we even learned that Eastman Kodak worked with the federal government on testing and production of the first atomic bomb by designing special cameras capable of capturing the instant explosion. I think we also heard about this earlier today, this morning, about photography's connection about to nuclear violence. Can you speak a little about your processes in photography, why, how you came to them, and some of that history?
Yeah, I mean, especially with Caltech, when I was there, I didn't know what I was going to do when I went there. I mean, I had an idea, but I started to do research in the archives, and I discovered that they were in part they designed the detonators for Little Boy and Fat Man, the two bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, most people there didn't know that. I didn't know that before I went there. I knew Oppenheimer had been there, but then there's Bacher. There's all kinds of people who worked on the Manhattan Project who were at Caltech. So it's very much there. And I was looking in the archives through an irradiated lens, because that's what I've been working on since 2008. And all the darkrooms have been abandoned, and they were like, take whatever you want, we're going to destroy all of this and throw it away. And so there were hundreds of boxes of photo paper, and I was printing archival transparencies on the photo paper, and I was having the darndest time. Like, I couldn't get a good print. And I was like, what's up? Is it my chemistry? Of course it was the paper. Then I thought, I have to throw this away. I'll test each box. And I would put the paper in, and it would turn gray or black. And so I decided, I didn't plan to do this at all, but doing the research there and seeing how so much of the discovery, like image making is at the heart of scientific discovery. I mean, the Becquerel photograph that David shows, I show that every time I lecture on my work, and it was through the exposure of the X-ray film in a vault in the Red Cross Hospital in Hiroshima that the Japanese knew it was an atomic bomb. They didn't even know it was an atomic bomb until they saw the totally exposed X-ray film in the vault. It's like they're intertwined. The nuclear age and the photo age are kind of hand in hand. So to have this photo paper in the Sky Atlas darkroom where all the images of the sky taken at the Palomar Observatory were made, I mean, it was so kismet, it was so insane. And then I was like, I have to just try drawing a nuclear test with the chemistry. And then like 6 hours later, I had done 40, and I was like, I have to do all 528 of the atmospheric nuclear tests. And I was like, okay, well, how was the paper fogged? Because they were in closed boxes in the basement, unopened. And it was my Rolfer, my massage guy in Pasadena, who I was telling, and he said, well, maybe it was radiation. And I remembered there was a radiation sign on one of the doors in the basement where this darkroom was. And I get goosebumps every time I say this, because maybe it was. It probably was, if you think about it. It shouldn't have been fogged in a closed, unopened photo box in a dark room basement. But anyway, to me, it's very much about, like, also I'll stop after this because I can talk about this for hours, but the cyanotype, I went to Japan to do autoradiographs, putting A-bombed objects on X-ray film to see if the radiation in the objects would expose it. And there's the one that came out that's in this show, called lingering radiation. But it was being in Hiroshima and seeing the shadows that were left of the time of the bombing, which I had known about, but seeing them in the Peace Museum, like the shadow of the man and the shadows in the films, I was just gobsmacked. Like, I couldn't even go to the rest of the museum when I saw these films. I had to just absorb it. And then Ishiuchi Miyako, who's this amazing Japanese photographer, had to show up, and she photographed things from the Peace Museum that had touched human skin, which included like canteens and clothing, and the clothing was indigo blue or cyanotype blue, and I was like, ding, 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 I have to do cyanotypes. I didn't plan to do that, but it made conceptual sense with the shadows left in Hiroshima and the color of the clothing. So to me, the photo process, all of the photographic process is really bound up. Plus photography is my main thing, but yeah, to me that makes...
We even see some of the vestige of that possible radiation in the cyanotypes that are in the other gallery too. We see the
well, the cyanotypes are not, well, it's the sun radiation. It's the sun exposing the cyanotypes, but it's not. But Fiona's pictures of the A-bomb trees that are in the Nichols gallery, I didn't even realize it. I mean, I should have. I knew she had processed it with the wastewater from Fukushima, but it wasn't until we visited your class and she zoomed in from New Zealand that she explained the flares in those photographs are from the radiation in the wastewater. I thought they were just dappled sunlight. I thought they were just sunbursts, but that is the radiation in the wastewater causing those white flares in those images, which is pretty incredible.
And you made a photogram of something that had a flare in the show.
Well, the lingering radiation.
That plant, a little plant? Yes.
Oh yeah. I see what you're saying. Sorry, I forgot about that. Thanks, Sheila. Yeah, the cyanotype that's in the Lensner, that's of the Fukushima Queen Anne's lace and the mushroom. There's a little circle to the left of the stem that to this day I cannot explain. It looks like the mushroom top must have touched the paper, but it didn't. It never did. Nothing sat where that circle is to the left of the stem. I made that print. Nothing was there. And I'm not saying it's radiation. It's just mysterious. And if you make work like that in Hiroshima or Nagasaki or Fukushima, you just can't help but think, at least symbolically, it's tied to invisible penetrating radiation or, things you can't see. So, yeah, thank you. I forgot about that one.
Yeah, that's a beautiful image. I love it. Is there somebody else? Oh, there it is. Yeah.
That's it. That's the one.
Yep, right. Perfect timing. So, was there somebody else in between?
Go for it,
me?
Sheila.
Okay. So, my trajectory is a little different. I managed to get an MFA in photography at UCLA without ever using a camera. And you can understand why Pomona College was a little reluctant to hire me as the head of photography. But they did. So, so in the early to mid 80s, I was in Chicago teaching at the School of the Art Institute. And my mentor, one of my friends there, introduced me to a Canon copier. And so I discovered the incredible gift of that copier to me. At the time, Canon was way at the front of duplicating technologies that were available to the average person. And this particular copier had incredible resolution. It had a very great contrast of images. I could put my hands on it and discovered I could make monster hands. And then I could make monster faces. And I was doing all this work about the thermonuclear garden issues and discovered that I could make things that sort of dovetailed into that content. And that's where the piece in the Nichols came from 40 years ago. I was asking all these questions, and it never occurred to me that they'd be more relevant today than they were 40 years ago during the Reagan administration. But I also discovered that I could put translucent paper into the copier, copy hands and faces onto it, work back into it with charcoal, and then contact those things to diazo paper, which is a direct positive paper used by architects. And so I did transform those Xeroxes into diazo and then had those photographed, and then they became silver prints. So that was how I got into the ending of what's in the gallery was eventually a silver print, a photo print. But I also discovered that that same Canon copier had a computer in it. And I had this book that told me all of the countries that had purchased armament, not necessarily bombs and planes, but bullets and guns and all kinds of other things from the United States. It had a huge number of pages devoted to the countries that purchased things from the United States between 1976 and 1979. So I copied every one of those pages onto an 11 by 17 piece of paper. And then I also discovered that I could put myself on the machine and it would copy me. And so then I ran those pages, all that data, through the Xerox machine while I'm on the Xerox machine. And so my image big is then reproduced onto those pages. And it's about a 6 by 9 foot vertical mural that I did using this Canon copier. So I was able to make, because I didn't have a camera, my camera had been stolen, and I never missed it. And I was able to use this. I could make Xeroxes 17 inches wide and 40 feet long on this machine, and talk about the history of the nuclear industry. And that's how that's what I did.
It's amazing. I think there's even a Xerox show right now where David Campany's writing on this Xerox show, and this is the OG right here. So along with that question, maybe the counterpoint to that question is, some of you approach this topic through drawing. And, in contrast to technological imaging, drawing speaks to human observation, interpretation, gesture. Can you speak a little bit to how, maybe this, questions for like Nancy, Hillary, how you approach the topic through drawing? Yeah.
Drawing.
Drawing.
Well, after working with my father's papers and making several pieces from them, I decided, well, I want to go back in the studio and draw. And what came up? Mushroom clouds. So that was where the series came from. It was like just an evolution. And I was thinking about the fact of denial. It's like the first mushroom cloud I made was exploding in a big bouquet of flowers, because what happens after a nuclear explosion is that the agriculture becomes weirdly huge. It's not normal. And so I called that everything's coming up roses, for the way that we tend to sweep the negative consequences of so many things we do in our country, under the rug and try to make light of them. And then there was a sweet dream of, a bomb becoming a ice cream sundae. And but then there was a sort of more sinister one, which is the snake nest that's hatching. So that was that series.
Definitely. And Hillary, you spoke a little about incendiary traces, and can you talk about how you're approaching drawing to speak about these, like, really how it can distill a really complicated subject like that and interpret it in a different way?
Yeah. So I think drawing is, so actually I feel like for me, I feel like I've just been talking about this for a little while, but I just came back from a field trip with a bunch of geologists talking about, and I was talking to them about why draw instead of take photographs in the field, or any other kind of mechanical or electronic ways of, observing a location. One of the things that, so yes, drawing is something that we do from observation. Drawing is something that is not mechanical, and because of that, we have to distill, or like you said, we're using the word distill. We choose what we're going to put on the page. It doesn't get there unless you put it there yourself with drawing. And so that is, it really has to do, to me, with making decisions about what kinds of information you're going to draw from a very complex situation. And I don't mean that like literally draw, but yes, literally, I meant like cull from that and then actually like note it in some visual way. That's kind of how I think about, or that's how I work with drawing now. That is not the same thing as trying to make a picture. They're kind of different. You can make a picture by doing what I'm describing, and I do, but the purpose of what I do is really not necessarily to make something that has some kind of, it's not initially to make a kind of a formal or aesthetic sort of artifact. It's to sort of try to record what is there, and quite quickly, actually. That's also part of what I have been doing for a long time. With Incendiary Traces, I was bringing people to draw in locations where the military or border agencies, or in one case, the police in Mexico City, use different kinds of technological imaging of landscapes to control an environment. So they could be in simulation or surveillance or other kinds of visual imaging. I would take people on these. I would organize tours where the people who were who were sort of the authorities at the locations on these imaging processes would tell us about what they were doing very proudly, and we would sketch while we were in those locations. they were not really interested in letting us sit there all day long. That wasn't their job. Their job was to give us a tour. And so often we would have maybe 15 minutes, maybe an hour at tops to be in a particular place to draw something. And as a result, I really got used to being able to draw fast. And that also required a certain kind of immediate question about what am I abstracting from what's here and putting on the page. And so that, and to also sort of say this isn't really about the picture, this is an artifact of a particular experience. The drawings that are in the Nichols Gallery are from two locations that have nuclear resonance. One of them is a former nuclear ballistics testing facility in England on the North Sea, and the other one is San Onofre State Beach, which is next to the San Onofre nuclear power plant, which is being decommissioned. They're both at the sea. I was drawing clouds there in a very kind of mechanical, systematic way in both places with a sort of very controlled time for each of them. And the clouds at the sea are moving really fast. So in order to do that, there's a kind of I'm not really drawing what is actually there because it goes away much quicker than I can actually record it. So it's more of a gesture of the passing of these particles, water particles in the sky, and a kind of a gesture of wind or, movement, temperature changes, et cetera, right, over time. And so that's definitely not what you're going to get if you're going to take a photograph. It's the opposite. What you get with a photograph is a moment in time. And so that's kind of where I think that for me drawing is it's really like talking back to the machine and saying, this is not capturing what you think. And in a way, with Nancy sort of saying, everything's coming up roses, there is a certain kind of, especially, increasingly today, I would say, photography is so seductive, right? The photographic image can be so seductive. And I feel like with drawing, I'm sort of saying, I'm not buying what you're selling, So, yeah.
Wow. So I think some of the most arresting moments in the exhibition were the human impact of the nuclear state, from Elin's video, which marked the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to Judith's correspondences from her father, from Robert Oppenheimer. That was just, I think our students left where it was dead quiet when we left there, just poring over those letters. So my students, I currently teach a socially engaged photography class here at Pitzer, and to tie in with this exhibition, we were working with a group of families that were affected by a nuclear spill here in the Santa Susana Field Lab. It's about 45 minutes away from Pitzer College, and these families started to notice increased rates of childhood cancer in a very small demographic and a mile away from the facility. And Boeing, who took over the land, is saying that they've done their due diligence, they've cleaned up, and yet there are still higher rates of cancer. And my students are going out there meeting with these families and having conversations. And so for my question to you, so this exhibition was incredibly powerful and poignant because as they're real time hearing these stories from the spill, it wasn't even detonated there, it was just a test site, right? And the Woolsey fire, I don't know if you guys remember the Woolsey fire, it spread these chemicals airborne into that whole area of Simi Valley. So my question is, we're learning that radioactive waste is not solely a problem just at the site of detonation or these bomb testing ranges. How can you talk a little bit about this as an environmental issue? And how could you are you seeing this as an environmental issue? I know Elle and I have had great conversations where, can you speak a little bit about this as, we talked about global politics this morning, but I think someone in the audience asked a question about the environmental impacts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was Lauren Bond from the Metabolic Studio, and I'm just so
Is that
thrilled
really
that,
Lauren
yes,
Bond?
Yes.
Wow.
I'm so
sorry,
thrilled that
can I
she's
geek
here.
out for a second? The Lauren Bond. Wow, sorry.
Yeah, really thrilled. This question really is, to me, the single most important question right now, because most people who are pro-nuclear think it's going to solve the climate crisis and the fossil fuel problem. And they just don't think about from the moment you're extracting the uranium. Like, they don't even think about the extracting of the uranium. Who's extracting the uranium? Where is it being extracted from? Where are the tailing ponds going to be? They don't think about the energy it takes to build the plant that's always billions of dollars over what they say it's going to be. And the cleanups. And they don't think about the accidents. They don't think about the waste. And the waste is serious. Like, the San Onofre plant is decommissioned. But the spent fuel rods are in casks right along the ocean that are supposed to be in dry casks. It's the worst place for them to be. David, my husband, has been working with the mayor of Irvine trying to move them to the Camp Pendleton, across the highway, where at least would be further from the ocean and relatively protected, because there's no protection at the San Onofre plant. If you go there, you feel like you could just walk right in. You probably could just climb the fence and go. I mean, I've been there with Hillary drawing. It's not protected. And anyway, I'm digressing, I think. But every step of it is a catastrophe. And my favorite quote, there's two favorite quotes, but my favorite quote is by Paul Virilio: when you design a sailing vessel, you guarantee a shipwreck. And there's no way, like the Fukushima plant was on a fault. The plant where I grew up in Maine, where I protested the Maine Yankee plant, it was on the tip of a peninsula. Not the tip, it was on a peninsula where a lot of people who lived in the peninsula were going to have to drive closer to the plant to get away from it. Like, all the places, like, why put San Onofre on the ocean where it's just going to leak? Fukushima, the wastewater is just being dumped in. The whole thing is a nightmare from the beginning of the extraction to the end of the waste. And people are just kidding themselves that it's going to solve anything. And I'm going to just stop there, I think, for now, but I could go on.
Well, my video already covers part of the way the environment affects, but just something else I want to talk about. It's in my family more than simply my father and me. My niece's paternal grandmother was part Indian. She grew up around the Navajo reservation, playing on some of the testing sites. As a young mother, she died of a very virulent breast cancer. So her children didn't really get to have a mother. And then my niece and her cousin, they were both born with very severe birth defects. My niece only has one functional lung because she's missing a pulmonary artery and other problems. The same with her cousin. And, just thinking of both her grandmother and then her grandfather, he was a maker of the bomb. Her mother was a victim. And they both died, And that's just in my family. And of course, nobody's from a normal family, right? None of us are from normal families. But I've always thought of myself, it's a normal family, a normal American family, but not really. But I'm also wondering the extent to which that trace is in many families in the United States. And I just want to say something about the Navajo reservation, which unfortunately was not represented in this show. Maybe in the future it will be. But the Navajo, because they had so much uranium mining on the Navajo reservation, and because there's so many of the people worked in the mines, they wouldn't even tell them to wear masks because of security purposes. They didn't tell them when they set off the bombs and so forth and did the testing. So there's so much damage and destruction and cancer really going on there. And that's just one place. And Robert Jacobs also, maybe you can speak to this, but he was a historian in Hiroshima for many decades, but he's an American. And he talks about, we think of Japan as the center of the damage, But in fact, didn't he say 2 million people from production and testing and around the world? And he also talks about how all the countries that have nuclear weapons, well, we tested it for a while in our country, then we quickly moved it to the Pacific. But all of the countries, they moved it to their colonial places. So France tested its weapon in Africa, and each of the countries tested elsewhere. They didn't test in their own country.
Russia did. Russia tested in Russia.
Russia tested in Russia. Oh, that's right, okay. But any other comments about the environmental?
So just to follow up on, this is a huge question, subject, but just to give a very fast overview of that problem. In the United States, Hanford in Washington State was one of the main generators of nuclear materials, and they put the effluent and all the residue from that work into these canisters that are now leaking. And they then tried to put some of that material, they thought they were safe because they were above the level of the drinking water in the area. There was a rock substrate above the drinking water, but they discovered that it leaked. And so a lot of that residue was leaking in and contaminating the water in the area. And they still don't know how to fix this problem, but that's true in every place where they've done nuclear development. There's a Savannah River project in South Carolina. It's got the same problem. A huge amount of that land has been rendered not usable due to leakage. And in San Francisco Bay, we discovered that there were many, many containers full of nuclear waste that were just dumped into San Francisco Bay that are now leaking. And that's just the tip of the iceberg relative to what happened in the Pacific, where Pacific Islands were completely annihilated and people can no longer live in a lot of those islands because of the nuclear contamination. So it's a gigantic subject. And this is just the United States. So.
No, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Earlier in the talk we were talking about. I was gonna ask a question about the fact that I found out that we spend billions every year in cleaning up nuclear waste across the country, just from the Cold War installations that some of them don't even exist. And I was shocked to know that. And then shocked to know that the former Secretary of Department of Energy under Trump's first administration was saying something like, it's become more of a work program. That's how continual the cleanup is. So maybe that maybe leads us to conclude our last question before we open it up to the audience. And that was sort of, what are the issues that you see that are changing right before our eyes right now? What are some of the policy reform ideas you have coming from this work? I know Ellen and I could have probably talked for 4 hours the day she came after class. I stalked her to her car, asking her questions, because we're bringing visibility to this subject at an institution like Pitzer. In my classes, I want this generation to carry the torch and care about these things. But when they ask me, TK, what are our next steps to push people like Boeing to clean up legislation? Can you give us some hope today, SWANS? What should we be thinking about right now?
Well, I don't know what we should be thinking. Well, we should be thinking about a lot of things, but I do think things like this, I loved that Jim this morning talked about the importance of art, and that I always tell people, art can change the world as much as anything else can. I hate it when people say art can't change the world, because laws don't change the world. Our politicians are changing the world for the worse. So everything changes it or doesn't change it as much as anything else does. And I do think it's our job as educators and artists and activists and citizens to tell people, when we had our first show show at Cerritos College, and I was talking to students. There was, and I'm not saying this to say they're dumb. They were not dumb, and they really care. But they said, we dropped a bomb. We dropped an atomic bomb in Japan. They did not know, and it's because they weren't taught that. And even our kids, you know, with David and I as their parents, they go to the best public school in Chapel Hill, and they bring in nuclear industry experts trying to get these students to go that track of working in the nuclear track. And my kids are the ones who are like, wait a minute, what about radiation? Oh, you don't have to worry about radiation. And I really do think we have to educate people about this. I mean, that's the least we can do. It's not a policy change, but it's something I think we do have to talk to people. There are a lot of lefty, I'm a socialist. You know, I guess I would say I'm a communist, but you say that in this country, you're going to get killed. So I say I'm a socialist, but, you know, I'm a lefty. But there's a lot of people on the left who are pro-nuclear because they think it's the environmentally correct. Yeah. And I think so you need to debate with people. And I think Jim said that as well, right? Like you have to meet these people where they are. You can't just go say, oh, we have to get rid of this. It's not going to work. You have to be able to debate. And you know, I did want to just give a shout out to my friend John Meany, who brought Jim Walsh, because John Meany was my debate coach in high school. I've known him since I was 15 years old. And he was a very formative force in my life. He gave me Susan Sontag's On Photography when I was 15 years old. So anyway, but they're right. And David says, at the last talk David gave too, is about we have to have hope and you have to acknowledge the wins, like they pointed out the successes of we haven't annihilated ourselves yet, but how and why and how can we stop it? I don't know. I don't think any of us have the answer. It has to be a collective endeavor of, you know, gargantuan proportion to fix this and to educate people and to change things.
Well, I think it is really important to look at the budget and look at the amount of money that is allocated for nuclear weapons. I mean, it's huge. And I think Trump just said the other day, well, I can't spend money on schools and this and that, but I need to protect us. And it's like, what a bunch of baloney, you know? And I think it matters for people to write to their representatives. I mean, I write to them not too often so that they won't think I'm a total crank, but I usually get a letter back agreeing with my position. I think if you have friends that live in states where there's a different point of view, you could encourage your friends to write to their representatives. I think that we have to push our government. You know, there's not enough push going on. But I mean, so many people came out for the No Kings. So I think we're ready. We just need to have a little more will to keep going.
I 1,000% agree, yeah, with all those ideas. I just want to say one thing I got from Jim Walsh, what's his name? Yes. Also just this idea of the importance of place and location. And I was thinking, how would I have felt in the 18th century in Italy when all the small cities were fighting each other with their horrible weapons of boiling oil on each other? And could they even have imagined what happened to Italy in the mid-19th century when suddenly it stopped fighting and it was a nation? And the same with Europe, fighting for centuries and centuries. So this idea of that's really what these weapons are based on. And I love what he ended with about having a positive, like we cannot imagine what might be coming to us in the future. I love that positive notion, which is not to say we shouldn't stop fighting against nuclear weapons, although I think human beings will always create deadly weapons as long as they see enemies. And it's this problem of seeing enemies, but anyway.
So the START Treaty finished on February 17th. And what that did, and the USSR, Russia, and the United States were parties to that treaty that got them to lower the number of nuclear weapons to 1,500 per country. 1,500 is a ridiculous number of nuclear weapons. I mean, you saw what the smallest nuclear weapon did to Hiroshima, 15 kiloton bomb. I mean, I don't think we need more than one. right? So I think we need a new START treaty, because what happened when the START treaty finished is that other nations started developing their own nuclear programs in Europe and the Far East, Southeast Asia. And I think that we need another START treaty for all the countries in the world. And I don't think any country needs more than maybe one nuclear weapon in that treaty, right? And I really think we need to push for another worldwide START treaty.
I just want to say one last thing, which is that I think maybe to connect some of the things that Jim and David were saying earlier, it did strike me that, so David's talk about energy really stuck with me, like energy transfer, and starting with like we're all stardust, which might sound kind of poetic and woo-woo, but it's actually true. And starting with that is, I think, useful for maybe zooming out, which is where I think Jim was starting to go when he was talking about this kind of like we each are territorial and, people are territorial trying to control their own domain, and not sort of understanding that we're all actually the same. Like, that's what the Stardust comment is like everybody's, actually, we're not even humans, like, if you put it that way, right? And we're just kind of like a bunch of particles that humans can't even understand and like bouncing around, right? And so this is like, I'm saying these things, and I'm not expecting that people are going to stop being territorial, because they're not, and I'm not expecting that people are going to stop, wanting to defend their territories and use whatever means that they believe are necessary to do that, because that's what humans do, But I think that that there are many different ways to look at our predicament, many, and some of them are, yes, we're scared, and like this is what policymakers who want to have nuclear weapons are thinking, is that we're under threat and we need to defend ourselves. There's also the perspective that, maybe that's what are you defending in the first place, and why? And I kind of feel like, I think Jim was kind of hinting at that too a little bit, which is that maybe there's a paradigm shift that could happen at some point. I don't know, but I feel like there are opportunities to think differently about the whole situation, and it will require a lot of creativity. It doesn't have to be art. It's just thinking creatively,
Amazing. Well, we want to thank you, SWANS. And I think we're going to now give it to our studio audience here to ask questions.
And just before we do that, I just want to say thank you to Emily Butts, the curator of this exhibition. Really, really.
And her incredible team. Thank you.
She did an amazing job. And Jenny and Michael, who both made it all really pleasurable and amazing. So, and Pitzer and all of you. Thank you.
Now we'll take it to the studio here. Anybody have any questions? Do we have a roving mic?
Thank you so much for amazing show and amazing symposium. I learned so much, and then I really enjoyed the show. I am a Japanese artist. I grew up in Japan, and then all those topics are so familiar to me. I have a big question to people in United States. So I wonder why people here doesn't treat atomic bomb victim as the same degree as, like, for example, like black slavery or Jew from like Nazi or like genocide victim. Like 2023, there was a movie, Oppenheimer came out, and then at the exactly same timing, there's a Barbie movie came out. And then Barbie movie was celebrated as a feminist movie, And then people are so excited, and they started making a meme called Bob and Bomber. I can't even pronounce well, but they kind of combined together. And then internet was like so happy about it. And then I'm pretty sure so many feminists in United States saw the meme, and no one said a word. And I was so shocked. And then finally, people, because the meme became so popular, it reached to Japan, across the ocean. And then people in Japan saw the meme and like, what's going on? Like there's an atomic bomb crowd behind the Barbie movie. And then everything is pink and they celebrate and look so happy. And then like people in Japan are so confused. And then the movie company endorsed those memes in their official account. So people in Japan raise a voice and then ask the question about those movie company to take down the endorsement. And then I was deeply shocked because I had a huge trust in feminist community in United States, but I didn't just hear a word, like no one questioned about, is this right things to do, or how to treat this image of the crowd. Like, have you ever think about people underneath of crowd, right? So that was my question. And like, I just don't know how people grow up here, but I just want to know.
Well, the Oppenheimer movie, I mean, I'm sure lots of you saw it, probably most of you did, but, you know, they didn't show the effects of the atomic bomb at all. It's my biggest critique, and I really hated that movie in a big way. Plus, I just could not deal with the sound. I just had a headache, and it was just a hero. It was just like this heroic tale about these scientists, and you did not see any of the effects of the atomic bomb. And the U.S., more than any other country, you know, the information and the visuals of the effects of the atomic bomb were suppressed. I mean, the Smithsonian was supposed to have a show in 1995 that showed the effects. They canceled it, and they only showed the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the atomic bomb, and that was in 1995. Fast forward to the Oppenheimer film, and it's the same thing. We do not see the effects. So the American people, and, you know, the suppression, John Hersey's Hiroshima. Anyway, it's a long story of denial and suppression of images, and people don't want to know. And plus, we were the bombing nation, so we don't want to take responsibility for what those bombs did to people. And I was totally appalled by the Barbie and Oppenheimer thing, but I saw both of them.
I want to just emphasize the word denial in the American psyche. We still can't even hardly fully, we want to erase the words American slavery from textbooks in different places in the country. We can't even look at that. And on the day of Trinity, when they first exploded the bomb, it was right near the Navajo reservation. Some girls were camping. You can look it up on the internet. They were camping a few miles away. They wouldn't tell them what was happening. So suddenly the girls woke up at 5 a.m. to the light in the sky, and ash was coming down. They got into their bathing suits and like rubbed the ash all over their body. And of course they died, you know, of cancer. All of them died of cancer as young people. It's partly the American psyche won't look at the number of Native Americans that we killed, won't even barely talk about it in colonizing this country. So I think on one hand with that movie, there was so much left out of that movie, but there is this kind of what David was talking about this morning, this alchemy, this mystery, this magic that was fascinating to everyone, not just Americans. And that veil was pulled back a little bit by that movie. So that was an interest. But there was so much that wasn't told. It wasn't really a full disclosure. Anyone else? We have
A question up there on the...
Hi, in terms of the American psyche, I so agree. And thank you, by the way. I want to thank you all for doing the work you do. But the U.S. citizens were not told about the effects of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki until it came out in the mid-1950s. Until then, we were told, well, I was very young then, we were told that the effects on people were not that terrible. And finally, it did come out. So we were lied to. And I was talking with, I apologize, what's her name? Sheila. I came from Florida, and I don't know whether they still exist. I'm sure they do. But Martin Marietta, which is now Siemens, General Electric, Lockheed Martin,
Yes.
and there's another one. They all build parts for the nuclear weapons, and people go to the Central Florida for Disney, but they don't know about those companies. So we're not told. It's up to us to dig underneath and find out the truth.
But there was also this Cold War kind of ideology of like, this, you know, the space race was exciting. It was in our movies. It was in our, you know, films. It was, you know, everything that music. Everybody was excited about racing to the moon and was excited about technology. And so there's also that brainwashing that happened too.
I just wanted to say that during the 80s, mid-1980s, I found this headline in the LA Times. Ronald Reagan decides to limit data collection by federal offices. He got the federal government to stop collecting information about themselves as a way to reduce federal government costs. So they stopped collecting information. So that was another thing that happened during the Cold War where they weren't collecting it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, and also there was a pride. I mean, like David said, there was 150,000 people working on the Manhattan Project. There was a pride to working on this national defense and beating the Nazis to the first nuclear weapon. I mean, it was this whole myth thing, but it was also real in some ways. And I think there are a lot of people in this country who do support it and do, I mean, obviously there are.
I would, well, there are different opinions upon this, but I have done some research. Oppenheimer went to school with Heisenberg in the 1930s. They went to the University of Göttingen, where he studied the new quantum mechanics. And he considered Heisenberg to be the most brilliant physicist of his generation. Then fast forward a few years, when they split the atom, when that's discovered in 1939, and Heisenberg is suddenly Hitler's scientific advisor. So, of course, the very first thing Oppenheimer assumes, is that Heisenberg is going to have Hitler build a bomb. As it turns out, Heisenberg had, where I've read newest research or historical research, that Heisenberg had qualms about that. So he told Hitler that it would be too expensive and it would take too long. Hitler thought he was going to win really quickly, all of which is to say there really wasn't a German bomb project. But, and the other thing is Hitler said he didn't believe in the Jewish science, so, because it was quantum mechanics and that was Einstein and so forth. So, and he thought he would win more quickly. But British intelligence knew by 43, beginning of 44, they knew there was no German bomb project, but the Americans didn't stop. And they kept working on it. And then it becomes a kind of Frankenstein story, which happens, I think, in all scientific endeavor, or this, what can you do with this scientific discovery, this information? Can we really clone human beings? Can we really alter this, that, and the other? And they just didn't stop.
And can I just just add? And, you know, the first time I went to Hiroshima to the Peace Museum, it was the first time I saw documentation of U.S. scientists had written letters to not drop the bomb, which never got to the president. And there was all this proof that the Japanese were ready to surrender. But we didn't have to. They had spent all this money and manpower and labor and effort to build this, and they wanted to drop it, and they wanted to study the effects of it. And then 3 days later, they dropped one on Nagasaki, which they didn't need to do either. But again, a different type of bomb, so they could study the differing effects of that bomb. So it was all about, you know, needing to do something with all these expenditures they had made. And I think there's still part of that mentality. You know, we have them, we have to use them. Otherwise, it's a waste, you know. I'd rather just not use them. But was there another?
Like AI.
Yeah, right.
I wanted to just respond to this really important question that you raised, that during the period that 3 of you on the committee here, on the group here, have been working on your art, there was also the Women's Pentagon Action and the Seneca Women's Peace Camp, Greenham Common, Comiso in Italy. And many of the women there were artists who put aside their artwork to be involved in the performance action, the happening-like action of being part of those camps. And there was a lot of dialogue with and visits back and forth between feminists in Japan at that time. And an interesting fact about that is that the movement tended to be focused on military installations, and nobody really foresaw the intersection between energy and power, in the sense of, you know, nuclear energy to heat a nation like in Kazakhstan. They're massively rebuilding, and this is where the Soviet Union tested on the land of Kazakh people, ethnic Kazakh people. Martin Luther King was very aware of this because his wife, Coretta Scott King, when she was in college, was an anti-nuclear activist, and Malcolm X spoke about the relationship between racism against black and nuclear issues. So I think that the ties are really there, but I speak as the daughter of a nuclear veteran who was on the deck at Wigwam, and I teach offshore at San Diego, where that boat was positioned when that bomb was dropped. And his voice was silenced throughout my childhood. So this idea of being silenced in this country is very, very strong, even in a context when there was more of a free speech possibility. So that's such an important question for now. So thank you.
Michael, there's a question right behind you. Yeah, okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you all for the wonderful symposium today, and congratulations on the fantastic LA Times article as well. Yay. It's really wonderful to see this work getting out there. I have a question for you, just as artists. Has your own practice or your own thinking of yourselves as artists or of the value of art in our world altered, changed, or being reinforced in any way through your association with SWANS?
I think, I really love collectives. I think, you know, and I call us a collective, the SWANS Collective, but I do feel like there's a power to multiple voices being spoken at the same time and in different ways. I mean, we're all very different artists. And I didn't even know most of these people until 2022. And it's really amazing. I've learned so much from them. I've thought so differently about my work and these issues. Even like Fiona, when we were at Tamara's class, she won't represent the mushroom cloud. She thinks it's such a spectacle. And I agree. And I struggled with making 528 mushroom clouds. But I did, and I think that's okay. But I love being challenged about it. I think it's a really good thing to think through these things and what do these symbols mean and what are the best symbols to use. And I think even like writing or mapping or activism or science, all these things, we come at it from such different places. So I feel like it's a reinforcement and an encouragement. And this is our 3rd show, and we've done some other things too, and I think we'll probably have more shows. And you know, I think people are learning through it. It's a way to communicate. It was in the LA Times. It was in Hyperallergic. I mean, those are 2 big things. To break through the news cycle right now with anything like this, to me, feels miraculous. And I mean, I'm from the East Coast, so to be on the front page of the entertainment section in the LA Times just feels really incredible to me. Like that we beat out the Hollywood entertainment industry. It's just funny. But anyway.
Well, Just on a personal level, I was always, as a young person and a young adult, studied art, always thought I would become an artist. Suddenly I didn't become an artist for various reasons, but just being a part of this collective has sort of encouraged that aspect within me. So I did do a drawing that was in the show.
And a sculpture.
And I did my little sculpture of the nuclear pile, that's right. And so it has encouraged, but I would also say, I mean, just from this morning and listening to the talks this morning and the association, that it has fed my writing work in ways that I didn't imagine that it would. Oh, and I also had the privilege of knowing Ellen, and she went to Hiroshima, and she said, I'm going to be there, you want to come? And so a couple of years ago, I was able to take a trip, and she was there, and it was an extraordinary trip, so that's another way.
I'll just, since we'll just go down the line here, I guess. Okay, so I'm not even sure where to begin to answer this question, except for first just to say that I don't, I guess I do think that it has given me an opportunity, I think, to think about my work in a different context. That might seem kind of like redundant with the question, but the only part that's not redundant is that it is an opportunity, and that it has given me a chance to think about the subjects that I draw and the way that I do it and the work that I do with scientists in the context of the nuclear, which I wasn't really doing before this. But it was definitely adjacent enough that it wasn't like, it was an easy connection to make. So I do appreciate that opportunity, and I actually have found that it's really interesting to see, even just today, to think, more about relationships and conversations that I have with, not the relationships, but the conversations that I have with scientists that I work with about topics that are related, specifically having to do with physics, actually, which comes up a lot in terms of conversations about science and the environment, and that it does actually circle back to this in unexpected ways. So that's very inspiring and is a fruitful part of the project. I will just say, on a personal note, the other thing that's kind of funny is that I knew all of these artists, except for Judith, long before SWANS in separate contexts. And so when we all got together at Nancy's, I didn't know what the reason was, actually. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And it took about an hour and a half before Sheila and Nancy and Judith each successively said, well, my dad was involved in nuclear physics too. And my jaw was like, what's going on here? So, because I've known these people for years, many, many, many years. So this has also been kind of fun for me, just on a personal level, to be like, you would not believe, you didn't even know, you would not believe the things. So it's been exciting. Yeah. Do you want to? You don't want to?
So
okay. Okay.
So I'm going to make it fast, but what I really appreciate about this show is, especially because of the content of the show, Emily has facilitated an expanded landscape for the show, in which there were many, many dialogues going on all over the Claremont colleges in classrooms, and she really made a huge effort to bring classes and people from the community into the gallery and to create this symposium. And this was a lot of extra work for Emily and her staff. And what she did was make this show have an important dialogic component. Most shows do not have a dialogic component, and I think a dialogic component makes the show a living dialogue, because it starts people thinking about subjects. It's not just a static show in the gallery. It's gone way outside of the gallery, and I really applaud Emily for her support of that particular dimension for this project.
So we know that the government tries to like keep things covered up, but I want to know some ways that like the government has tried to keep up like keep covered up like just like the atomic bombs and all the wars that are going on right now. And I want to know a couple ways that they've like masked that, like masked all of these things happening.
She's asking about what the government has masked, like they hid the atomic bomb. So you're asking for other examples of what the government has.
Dirty secret.
Or
dirty.
Or like how they
How they do it. Well, one thing I wanted to say earlier, because Tamara and I talked about this after a class, you know, it's said that only the U.S. dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Japan, but we've also used uranium-tipped missiles in Iraq and the Vieques Island, where her family is from. And there's a 2x the national average of cancer in the Vieques Island, which is a U.S., you know, colonial, whatever. It's part of our country.
Against Venezuela.
Yeah, and they stopped the uranium-tipped missiles, but then they started. But it only stopped because of protests and people finding out about it. They weren't broadcasting this, that they were using uranium-tipped missiles, and they never do. I mean, we don't know half the stuff that's going on right now in Iran and everywhere. But how they do it, I don't know, because I'm an artist, but they definitely do it. And they try to keep the truth from us all the time. And even the Epstein files. I mean, I don't want to go there. But even if they released them all, what's happening? Nothing. Nobody's been arrested for them. It doesn't even matter. Anyway.
Can I say one very small thing? At an educational institution, there's also censorship on what you can teach and how we teach history. And so it's really important to look at educational policies, particularly now, where we're experiencing a Cold War 2.0 in education and universities. So a lot of the dirty secrets happen in how we're disseminating history, information. It's an ideological war, a quiet cover-up.
We're supposed to just say good things about the country, right? You know, we're supposed to not diss the United States. And that is such a disservice to young people that they wouldn't know the truth, you know?
I mean, there are also like legal mechanisms for not for keeping things under cover. So, for example, I mean, you guys have talked about how your fathers didn't talk about their work. That was actually, I mean, there are things that happen today called NDAs, that just stands for non-disclosure agreements, or classified information. There are people who have jobs where they have to sign papers before they take the job saying they're not going to talk about it. And like you said, Sheila, your dad didn't talk about what he did until decades later. So that's one way that it happens. There are other ways that, and for example, there's another artist that happened to have been an artist in residence at Caltech a while ago, Leslie Thornton. Her father was also involved in the Manhattan Project just by chance, and her uncle was involved, and the two of them did not know that the other one was involved for decades. So just to give you an idea, like that's one mechanism. And then in addition to that, there's all kinds of things about like, how can you prove that something is true? Well, you would need to have some kind of argument that shows that it is true. And when it comes to contamination and cancer, environmental cancers, there are legal systems that require certain kinds of proof to be made, like, oh, all these people have cancer, how can you prove that it's because of them living near a radiation or a uranium mine? You have to actually have certain kinds of very specific information, data that is medical data that shows that this particular element, uranium, was, you know, like the story you gave about the women, you know, covering their arms in ash. That alone is not enough in court to prove that the radiation from the ash was the reason that they got cancer. So there's a lot of different ways that information is silenced that are part of the political and legal system.
I would just say for a student, another good thing is just read, if you haven't read 1984 by George Orwell, he kind of lays out the blueprint for how governments do that, for how they twist the truth, for how they censor the truth, and what happens to the truth, and who's in charge of it, and so forth, which is why it's so scary what's going on in some academic institutions. in terms of that.
And, another thing I just feel like should be noted is that, corporations fund a lot of the studies and stuff. So there was a study done 15 years before, and I hope I don't even see David, but I hope he doesn't mind me telling the story. But Sprint, he is there. Okay, Sprint funded the study about cell phones, and they did discover a causal relationship between cancer and cell phones, but Sprint funded it. And so, and they didn't know when they did it that they couldn't release this data. So it took another 10 years of a non-corporate funded study for it to come out. And so there's just a lot of that going on as well. Profit is the bottom line, the profit motive. Well, spells ecological disaster, frankly, but, it's, so.
And Sprint is allowed, just to tie up that one story, Sprint is legally allowed to not release the data. So that's part of how our country works.
Well, and we can add on top of that universities are counted on to do some of the research to be able to prove the legal cases, and are not able to get funding in order to do the work because not only because of federal funding cuts, but because we're going to say something to challenge the good work of the government. So it's a real double whammy, which is sort of the question I wanted to pose to all of you. You all use archives, of course. Everyone is an archive. Right? Our skin is an archive, right? But my question is about the archive, but also the scale, right? Like, you're working on things that are largely invisible. That's why the mushroom cloud is a spectacularized image, because you could see it. And so the problems are that we can't see it, and you're trying to figure out how to visualize both the issues and implications. And so my question is actually about archives in terms of the ways in which you use them to be able to depict, to humanize, to bring the issues to bear, and the ways in which the archive has played different roles in your work. Because on the one hand, it's the personal, and on the other, it starts to end up being all we have for the much bigger picture of, like at the end of your video, you say, this is my story, and it might not even be worse than others. I'm not paraphrasing well, but I thought, right, but we have your story, and I could watch the video and hear it. I wanted both because you're the image now of the milk path that I didn't have before and had no idea of how one would visualize, right? So anyway, but I'm really asking what you think your role and relationship as artists are in terms of the archive and this work.
I would just say I think that's the issue for all artists or writers or poets. It's always how you come up with that metaphor, how you come up with the image that's going to best communicate. Just listening to David's talk this morning about the weight of the wing of a butterfly. Extraordinary image. Immediately I started thinking of what I might do with that image. Because suddenly I saw, I've for decades have looked into, the mechanics of the atomic bomb or something, and a small amount, and they always compare the TNT and so forth, but I never realized that. And then he said, and the actual amount was a gram or something, was less than the wing of a butterfly. And so I think that, but what you're talking about is the challenge for all artists throughout time, really.
Archives are a huge thing, and I haven't worked on it, but I am working on a book called Dark Archives, so keep your eye out for it. And I have worked now in lots of archives, kind of not even on purpose. I mean, definitely Caltech, I went there to work in the archives because I had worked in the Hiroshima archive, and I worked in the Peace Resource Archive, and I've gone to the Vendée Museum Archive, which is a museum of the Cold War, but doesn't have anything nuclear. It's like really weird. But the archive is an incredible place, and it's a really problematic place because most archives are formed by the victors. They're really the master narrators of the story of history that form them. So I think you have to be really careful going into them, and you have to recognize your own privileged position of even being able to go in them, because most people can't just wander into the Caltech archive. I mean, maybe they can. You can make an appointment, but Yes, you can, but you have to know about it and you have to go, and a lot of them, like Hiroshima, the Peace Museum Archive, I always thought, I can't even believe I'm able to take these A-bombed artifacts. And I can't imagine a Japanese artist going to the Smithsonian and being able to make a cyanotype of anything from World War II. I just don't know. It's just a different sensibility. But I think archives are, I think everything is an archive. Every body is an archive, especially a body that's irradiated. It's an archive of that radiation. I think it's an incredibly rich and complicated subject that is its own subject, and yet it's like a parenthetical or an umbrella to everything else that at least I've been working on since 2008. I think the archive is critical to it. And I think they are a way that we learn, like how you do find out the things that were hidden or the dirty secrets, they come out in archives. Like I found boxes in the Caltech archives that hadn't been opened, like the seal was unbroken, of original photographs from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then like in the darkroom, I found the whole set of the Palomar glass plate negatives that they didn't have in the archives. Now they have them, but this stuff just disappeared. It's kind of amazing what you can find. And what strikes me in them as an artist is the visual. The visual is the proof. The image-making process. Like Cornelia Hess-Honegger is a scientific illustrator artist who collects insects near nuclear facilities, and she paints them. And she talks about the process of painting them and actually making images is the sort of precognitive process where you acquire knowledge is fascinating to me. And that's what the archive is full of for me when you go into them. That's what you find is like all this proof. It's pretty amazing.
I was thinking of Nancy. Didn't you say that your family saved everything?
Yes, yeah.
That's an archive. I mean,
yeah.
Archive.
Right.
That's what is missing from the Smithsonian.
Yeah. I had boxes and boxes of my father's papers that he brought home. And after he died, actually, Lockheed came to our house and they went into his study, and he had a fireplace in there, and they took some of the last papers that he was working on and burned them in the fireplace. So who knows what those papers were, but what?
He was in the political position when he did that, right?
Well, he was, at the time of his death, he was going to a meeting with the National Security Agency. And he had been consulting about defense for many years. A lot of his work was top secret. So I have no idea what those last files were. But some of the more chilling things that I saw in his papers were an exchange of letters that stemmed from a study that he was involved with about the possibility of war with the USSR. And this one sentence just stuck out. So when I made the file folders, I used the red pages with windows cut in them to emphasize things that I thought were really interesting, but you could also lift up the red page and read the whole letter. But he said something like, "It alarms me that some of the people in New York thought that the best thing to do would be just to have a war with Russia right away and get it over with." This was 1947. Wow. So, that was, there's a lot of times, I think, that we've been close to sort of the abyss, and that was maybe one of them. So that's an example of stuff from the archive of my father's papers.
I'll just say one other thing about archives is that I find there's incredible information in the archive, but the idea of the wing of the butterfly, I might have found that after endless searching, but archives also have this very intimidating quality, and you don't fully know what you're going to find. So in terms of those letters that I have in the show, the first handwritten letter I found early on in my search at the Niels Bohr Library at the American Institute of Physics. It was extraordinary for me to see my father's handwriting for the first time and so forth. But I never knew about Oppenheimer's response. And then the copy of the letter I had was very degraded, and I wanted a better copy. Those letters are originally from the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress has everything, and it has just folder upon folder of Oppenheimer. So when I was in there looking under Oppenheimer and then under my father's name, and then I had someone copy that, suddenly there's Oppenheimer's response. And I would never have known that if that happened a couple months ago before the show. It's really, so that's the thing about archives. It has everything, but then you don't know what you're looking for and so forth.
One more question.
I have one that's related with the visibility of the archive. And I'm thinking this just because I have my daughter here and because of the age of this constituency and the importance it is for younger generations to continue the work. And as I was going through the exhibition, I realized that I needed a lot of time to actually dwell in each of the pieces. And I wonder, how do we work with that space of the younger generations that seem to have less time, seem to have less interest in staying long with a piece, and at the same time the importance to get the work and the information to these generations in a way in which visibly pertains to them. So I was just thinking if you have that question as well, it's how do you bridge that space between the archive, the amount it takes for you as an artist to process what's in the archive, then the importance of preserving the time for the audience to actually dwell in the materials or not in order to get the information around.
Okay, so I'm not going to answer your question directly, but because I don't have an answer, but I do have some thoughts reflecting on my own experience as a parent and as a teacher. So I don't know if this will be helpful or not, but I have a 16-year-old daughter, and I have been teaching for a long, long time. So that means that I've been teaching young people in college for probably 30 years, close to 30 years. The students themselves, in terms of their attention span and interest, have not changed. So in my experience, it's not now they can't read a piece, an essay. They can. They can dwell on an image. They can do an analysis. Maybe they don't want to if they're, but I don't feel like there's any resistance to learning. I don't think that's, in my experience, that has not changed. People are inherently curious, I think, and want to know, or they don't. And that probably has nothing to do with our media environment. Certainly people's neurologies have changed if they grew up watching YouTube when they're babies or whatever. I'm not going to dispute that, that's for sure. But I also have faith that young people, when they are interested in something, will figure out how to engage, or they won't. And that's probably not due to whether or not they're stuck to their phones or not either. I think that's just, I'm not a technophobe, I think, but I'm also not a technophile, so maybe that's where I'm coming from a little bit, which is I'm kind of agnostic about it, and I feel like people will do what they're going to do no matter what, and that technology is a tool that they'll use in whatever way to do what they would have done one way or the other. So that's my 2 cents. It doesn't really, I don't know if it directly answers your question, but.
I taught for a long time too, and I actually taught at Caltech, and I was very surprised at how engaged they were. I had them read a lot of things, and they did a lot of work. And for me, coming from mostly a photo background, which is, I think, very fast generally, and more technical, and although I'm not a technical photographer, as you've probably gathered, but I do think employing the hand, like my first book was 60 drawings of places the United States has bombed. And I was in a fellowship group once, and my colleagues were like, well, you should show the pictures of the generals who dropped the bombs. We need to see the carnage, and we need to see I said, well, people see that. They already see that. And I think there is, Sontag wrote about the desensitization of people from seeing too many images. I think we need all of it. I think we need the gory stuff and we need the poetic stuff and the beautiful stuff. But for me, beauty is a way of communicating things in a way that people will engage with it and they want to spend time. Like, what am I looking at? This looks like a gorgeous watercolor abstraction and it's like the bombing of, Lebanon. When they go and read the text. And I think providing text and providing information is really important. But I think making things by hand is a slower way of, and I wanted to say that when you asked about drawing, like handmade things slow me down as an artist, and I think it slows the viewer down. It does. There's this speed of production and reception, and a way in the context of production and the context of reception really matter. And so providing the context of the show, because Emily did, such a stellar job of setting it up in this way that people are open to the content when they enter it. But then there's information with all the work. But I think our work, it's kind of fun to look at, even though it's about a really profoundly dark subject matter. So I think I'm answering it in some part, but I agree with Hillary. I don't know. I think people are engaged or they're not, or they will be or they won't, and age might be a factor, but I think just doing things very honestly and sincerely and with strong intention of communicating your idea and your concept in some startling way, from drawing or video or photography or sculpture or humor, is a way. And it is different. A lot of people don't go into galleries and art. So if you can just get them there, I think they will engage. I don't know. I don't know if you, Sheila?
So while I was teaching at Pomona, I had come from a model of teaching where, and I was teaching photo history and computer graphics and photography, but in my photo history class, I had come from a model of sitting in a darkened auditorium for 3 hours watching slide projectors going, and then they started to talk to me about how the students at Pomona had changed, the students at the club, at least that was their perception, and that I had to change the way I taught. And what they were saying is it needed to be a much more dialogic process. It needed to be, I needed to not lecture at them for 3 hours. I needed to figure out a way to ask them questions or engage them in the process of whatever it was I was trying to teach that got them to start talking about and asking questions themselves. And I think that engaging younger people in that dialogic process and honoring not only what they have to say and how they think about it, but also honoring that they may not know the answers, but it's really great that they ask the questions, to get them to ask questions, was really what Pomona College wanted me to do in my classes.
I was just going to add that we married this whole topic the entire semester with my class. Most of them are 19 years old. I kind of have noticed an attention span issue since the pandemic, a little bit. And we married it, meaning that we went to the exhibition first and we were astounded by the beauty. And then we met Ellen, and we heard Ellen talk about her process. And then we watched a movie, a film, and then we met people in the community. And how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. We just kept chipping away at it. And every week we would touch it. And I think that it took all of this entire semester for them to maybe even just, doing a website. What is nuclear energy? And marrying it. Are they nuclear experts at the end? No. I think they care a lot more about it than they did when they first started. And in a time of, all these images and this kind of traffic of imagery, to take the time and sit with something for a long period of time, like you were saying, you still ask them to read, you still ask them to, I think that attention span broadens if you allow it to. We don't feed into this TikTok culture, we interrupt it with that time, you know.
They were so engaged.
They loved, Ellen came and Fiona zoomed in. They loved this talk. You could hear a pin drop. And I think our next field trip is to go to the LA River, at the mouth of the LA River, and do cyanotypes where there is toxic spill from Santa Susana. I mean, they're already kind of Lauren Bond fans, you know, but absolutely. But yeah, maybe it's just bite-sized pieces that are age appropriate. I have an 11-year-old. I dig what you're saying. Thank you, SWANS. I'm in awe, man.
Okay, thank you all so much for taking the time today to spend with us. I hope that this sparks many conversations moving forward. Thank you to the wonderful SWANS, who it's just been such a pleasure and an honor working with you on this project. Thank you to our speakers, David and Jim, Tamara, Miguel, my wonderful team, Jenny and Michael, our student interns. So I'm so grateful. So I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. And yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Emily.
I'm so inspired by you.
Especially appreciate that place.
I could not remember.
It's great.
Absolutely. You're inspired.
Oh my God. Well, this was that great.
Oh, absolutely. I don't get to keep
Are you doing the sound or I'm the preparer.